With that said, it's my pleasure to introduce the speaker. I actually met David over Slack when I was advertising the very first KernelCon. I went into an Iowa Slack channel, and I was promoting KernelCon 2019. And while I was there, I looked at their jobs channel, and that's how I met Golf Hacker Dave. That's his username. And I've known David since then, since 2019, and I've worked with him. He's one of the best bosses I've ever had. He asked me to tell you all that he's taller than me, so yeah, and he's a better golfer than me. He wanted me to tell everybody that. So, without further ado, please put your hands together for David Lindner.
Thank you, Adam. Thanks, KernelCon. Love this place. Always have fun here and bring some of my team here to hang out, and it's kind of nice being in person. So today I want to talk about transparency. How many of you deal with government? Selling software, working with them, working through them? One hand, two hands? There we go. Everyone's awake now, right? Like we're through lunch, we got our siesta. All right. So I want to talk about some of the things that our government is at least talking about, some of the things that have happened over the last couple of years, and kind of my thoughts around it. But first, this is me. As Adam said, I'm David Lindner. I'm the CISO at Contrast Security. Been there about 4 years. Was lucky enough to work with Adam for most of that tenure. He's moved on to a bigger ship, but things are still good. So I want to start with just talking about software in general. And I think you all know this, but sometimes we're so deep into the work that we do, or, looking at a single app or using a single app at our API, and we forget the bigger picture. And that bigger picture is securing software is critically important. Software is used everywhere, in everything we do, in every facet of life. How much software is running in this room right now? Anyone want to guess what number 8 is on the World Economic Forum list of existential dangers? I like to talk. Throw it out. What was it? Cybercrime and cyber insecurity. You know what's above it? Environmental factors, cost of living, and COVID-like things. So it's a big deal, right? Like, it is something that even the world is saying, hey, we got to pay attention to this. Because everything we care about is now is running software or dependent on software. Medical devices, cars, everything. But what do you know about that software? You just download it on your phone and open the app, and you're dancing to TikTok and you're cool, right? You don't know who wrote it, don't know who tested it, don't know if it's secure or there's security problems, don't understand provenance, nothing. It just works, it's fun, it's great. I can get to my bank account, right? So we blindly trust it. That's one of the things about human nature that is good and bad at the same time. But over the years, software has kind of exploded, right? The shift in how we develop software from monolithic things that we deploy once a year, we have deploy parties with pizza and beer, and your boss is like, hey, good job, you just spent 26 hours deploying the new update. To, we're making changes every minute in some cases. Tiny little microservices. And with those changes, the attackers have kind of shifted what they're doing. And the different facets, the different parts of that software ecosystem that they're attacking, right? They're not just attacking the software itself. They're looking at what are they using to develop software? Where are they storing their artifacts? What sort of build pipelines are they using? They're attacking all of those things now, and it's just kind of changed the game, which is really kind of what's driving governments to try to step in and do some things. Because we're really living in a different era, if you will. In the 90s, I won't say if I was around then or not, it was like design-based defenses, right? Let's design systems in a secure way, and we'll be good. Well, it turns out that didn't really work really well, so then we went to network-based defenses. firewalls, IDS, scanning, pen testing. And then we realized, oh wait, we have all these web apps. We're just going to open holes in our firewall and we're good, right? Turns out that didn't work very well. And then we're, in the 2010s, 2015s, whatever, we moved into that people-based secure coding, DevSecOps, shift left. And that's moved the needle a bit. But software is all over the place. And so it hasn't really shifted enough. And now we're in this stage of accountability and transparency, and even in some cases liability, right? And we'll talk through some of that. And I'm excited for it, attestations, labels, SBOMs, all that stuff is here, it's coming, especially if you're dealing with the government. But as most of you may know, when it starts in the government, it bleeds out into the private sector. The financial institutions will pick this up like that. So something to think about there. So yeah, accountability, it's one of those things, there's going to be winners and losers here. We can either get our game together now and win big and be transparent and be held accountable, or we can get embarrassed and called in front of Congress. And we can be like the TikTok CEO or Mark Zuckerberg for whatever reason, because there was some security flaw or they think they're stealing data or whatever, right? The more transparent we can be, I think the better off we're going to be in the end. So why are we here after I got through that? So I wanted to talk about a few things. I'm not going to go into all these in depth. We'd be here for a week. But over the last couple of years, the U.S. government, this is pretty specific to U.S., there's a few things in here about like Finland and whatnot, but the Biden team and SEC and others have kind of created all these executive orders, binding operational directives. The Office of Management and Budget has done some things. SEC's got some proposals out that, is going to change the way software is written and how we disclose certain things. And then just yesterday, CISA released security by design and or default, which is interesting. I feel like we've come full circle, but we'll get into that a little bit. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is software security accountability. And while the executive order, which funny enough, it's been almost 2 years. Can anyone believe that? It feels like it was yesterday that this thing came out. It's 2021. And we're not starting with the problem with this executive order, and it's not all focused on what I would consider traditional software security. There's all sorts of things in this massive executive order with lots of timelines, and really it's kind of spawning all the other things that are happening, over those last 2 years. But it's really undeniable that there's a shift, right? Private sector, even the government sector isn't doing enough to assure the security of our systems, and maybe not even spending enough money. And we can get into budgets and stuff too if you want, but I don't really want to go down that path. So let's talk about this executive order. So there's a few sections that I feel like apply more directly to software security. One specifically, but some have some overarching software security facets to them. So the section 2 and 7 are about really tracking application security threat information. It's something that, and so this executive order actually applies to most of the federal civilian executive branch agencies, which is like the SEC, the NASA's of the world, OPM, NTSB, SSA, you name it. I think there's 102 today that this would apply to. So if you're selling to any of them and you create software, or you create software, sell to someone who then sells it to the government, this stuff is going to apply to you. So section 2 is really about removing contractual barriers with regard to sharing information, threat information, vulnerability information. The government has crazy contracts that preclude some of that. So they really want to get rid of that. So they can share more freely amongst the different agencies. When one gets a vulnerability reported, they can share that across the agencies so they can do stuff with that. And then section 7, it kind of goes and takes that a little bit further and talks about the approach to finding vulnerabilities. It specifically calls out deploying EDR across all of government. That sounds like a 10-year project, but it's something that probably needs to be done. Right. So it's going to be interesting to see how long some of these things take. There's going to be exceptions, and there's some pushback on some things too, and whatever. Section 3 is really about, modernizing the government, moving to zero trust, moving to cloud-based technologies and SaaS systems, which the government is traditionally like, whoa, hold on, are you FedRAMP, right? So they want to move into these more, modern technologies with some of the more modern security protocols and things that they can take advantage of that they're not able to today with their on-premises mindset and things like that. So Section 4 is the one I'm most excited about. I've been in software security for a really long time. Section 4 is really all about software security. It's about separating test, prod, QA environments. It's about requiring MFA. Thanks GitHub, by the way, for that. On all their systems. It's about data encryption. It's about S-bombing all the things. We'll talk about S-bombs. Software provenance, vulnerability disclosure participations, security attestations, all sorts of that stuff. That's Section 4. So if you're in that space, that's the one you want to read. Section 6 and 8 really kind of get into incident response and how we're detecting things, how we're responding. Section 6 really talks about the problem today with the federal agencies is they all have vulnerability and incident response procedures and policies, but they're all different. So they don't work well together. So, a lot of this is like, how do we get these agencies to work better together to refine the process? So they want to standardize on how do we do vulnerability management? How do we do incident response across, all of those civilian agencies? And then 8, I don't know if Seth's in here, but he's going to love this. It's all about logging. Logging is so important. It's one of those things that for incident response, for forensics, having logs accessible to whoever needs them is so critically important. And I'm glad it's kind of called out, in this executive order. But my favorite part about Section 4 is software security labels are here. Who goes to the store and they pick up a bag of chicken or a bag of, pasta and say, oh, I'm going to look at the label? That's going to be software soon. The government's saying we need to have security labels on all of our software. They're not defining it yet. I don't know what's going to be in there, but I'm sure it's going to have SBOM information, vulnerability information, A, B, C, D, F, whatever it might be. Singapore and Finland are actually doing similar things too. So this isn't like unheard of. What's funny to me though is I put a link on here. In 2004, that's almost 20 years ago? Jesus. Jeff Williams, my CTO at Contrast, he talked about software labels and how it'd be a great idea. So this isn't a new thing, but I'm really glad that someone is kind of taking the charge to move that needle. All right, so that's the executive order. Again, that was 2 years ago. Have they done much? Sure, yeah, they got all these other things now that they're pushing. CISA is really getting involved. And one of those was the Binding Operational Directive 2201 from CISA that really started their process of detecting the vulnerabilities that are being exploited. Here's our list. You need to fix these within certain time frames. At the time, it's like, hey, you need to fix all of these within 6 months. I think it was like 300 or something initially, and then I get notifications sometimes multiple times a week, like, hey, we added 2 more, we added 5 more. Is anyone using that list today? And a couple of you? Yeah. I think that will become more commonplace. It's not all application type vulnerabilities. There's a lot of operating systems and hardware devices and things like that. But these are the ones that they have the data that says, hey, these are being exploited. Some of them are really old too, which is kind of crazy. And then routinely report on those vulnerabilities. So this is like a CISA thing, but I do think that, it's bleeding into the private sector because they're getting the data. They're doing the work that we wish we could do. And like, hey, these are the ones you should focus on and make sure that they're not live in your environment. So they maintain a list. If you haven't seen it, it's on their website, cisa.gov. It's a catalog. They call it the known exploited vulnerabilities. It's worth taking a look and maybe just applying it to your vulnerability management program. There's not thousands, someday probably, since Jerry, it's 77 per day are released or something. So it's a really important aspect to what the government wants to do. And obviously CISA is kind of focused here on the civilian agencies, but more and more people are going to start using it. So they're publishing all of these, they're reviewing them routinely. and then providing status to, the different facets of Homeland Security and so on and so forth. So it's really been kind of nice to see, because there's thousands and thousands. I think there's going to be soon, or today or yesterday, it hit 200,000 CVEs, Jerry said, which that's a lot. We don't have time to patch 200,000, but if we can get it down to like, hey, these are the 300 that are most exploited, let's start there. So that's 2201. And then later on, the Office of Management and Budget said, all right, we're gonna create this memorandum 2218, which is based off of the executive order, which most of these are. The things in the executive order require timelines for certain agencies to do things, which is really requiring federal agencies, civilian agencies, to comply with NIST guidance when it comes to using third-party software. And so what NIST is basically saying is like, hey, you need to do two things as a software provider if you're selling to the federal civilian government. You need to provide a self-attestation, and you need to provide a software bill of materials. Is anyone doing SBOMs today that they're providing customers a little bit? Every one of your hands will be up next year if you're in software. I can almost guarantee it. Write that down. You can yell at me if it's not true. So this is an interesting step. Some agencies are probably already doing some of this. They're probably already getting or requiring FedRAMP. They're requiring a SOC 2 Type 2. They're requiring an ISO. Those aren't software specific though, right? Those are like organizational wide. They have software components. What this is, it's a software specific attestation, which includes things like the producer's name, description of your products and product services, and then attesting to the software and the security of that software and what you're doing to assure them that it is secure. Now you might say, well, it's a self-attestation, it's like the CAIQ, it's like the SIG, which is true, but it's better than nothing, right? I mean, today it's like, hey, let's just sell software, and no one kind of like digs under the covers, and as a CISO, I can't make a risk-based decision like, oh, well, what does your software do? So having more information is going to be helpful. Supposedly, they're going to release a standard form for this. I haven't seen it yet, which is interesting. I would have thought by now that they would have had something for that. But it's not required for agencies to use that standard form. They can really do and require whatever they want. So they could actually require it be a third-party attestation if they want it. It's an interesting little loophole in the OMB 2218. So things like basic security information, who built it, versions of libraries, does it have known vulnerabilities, how is it tested, and maybe more. I mean, whatever agency you might be doing business with, or financial sector person probably, they might have their own requirements, which may be a little unfortunate. Standardization on this might be a better approach. So I wanted to dig into SBOMs a little bit. It's been something that we've talked about for a couple of years now, probably more than that, but ever since the executive order came out where it specifically called out SBOMs, it kind of exploded. And I think there's a lot of myths when it comes to SBOMs that I wanted to kind of get through, and then how do you generate them, and where in the process you generate them, and how different they might be. But there's a lot of myths. The first one, SBOMs help attackers. That's just false. Come on. What it does is it holds the software producer accountable, right? It holds them accountable instead of hiding behind the curtain on things they know they need to fix. It's holding them accountable. SBOMs aren't actionable. That's mostly false. There is a lot you can do with an SBOM. There are tools now that can take an SBOM and spit out like, here's the 10 CVEs that are in the libraries that this SBOM has. And then you have actionable things you can do. SBOMs expose your code. Definitely false. It just tells someone what libraries you're using. SBOMs don't scale. I don't think we know that yet. Today, I would agree with that. But I think that there's a movement to figure out how to scale SBOM. Because the reality is, like someone like me at a very SaaS-heavy organization, we have 700 SaaS vendors we deal with. I can't review 700 SBOMs every quarter. It's just not possible. We have to be able to scale it. And then SBOMs are accurate. That is so false. I wish they were. And there's different ways to generate them, and I wanted to kind of talk through that. But the reality is, with this push from the government and whomever else may be asking for them, SBOM should accurately reflect the actual software that you're providing to whoever's purchasing it. Accuracy, that's debatable on who defines it, but it should accurately reflect the software you're handing over to the person who's going to use it. And I think people's expectations of that are so wildly different because all they hear is SBOM and, all right, I need to generate an SBOM. So they go look and there's a GitHub utility that creates an SBOM and they think they're good. And it's interesting, right? Because today, the way this works, we're not giving people SBOMs. We're hiding behind some things, and then someone gets breached, and Congress is pissed. Everyone is shocked, like, oh my God, how could they have been so careless? Who is to blame? Fire the CISO, right? That's kind of where we're at, and it's because we haven't been transparent. We haven't provided the ability for these organizations to make any sort of risk-based decision other than saying, oh, we have a SOC 2 Type 2, which isn't really focused on the software itself. But really, it's all silly. I mean, everyone has vulnerabilities. I've been in this business for 25 years, and I've never seen a customer who has no vulnerabilities. It's just not a thing, right? The average app has like 25. So SBOMs is like a small component, and it's like you can go in and get 50 different types of blood tests. It's like one blood test, right, for the software. It's an important one, but it's like, we need to figure these out. So where does the SBOM data come from? For those of you who raise your hand, how are you generating your SBOMs, if you don't mind? Feel free, or not. No? Proprietary. Transparency. No, it's fine. So there's a few ways, right? So there's the source code repo, which is frankly probably the easiest for most developers. There's plenty of repos in GitHub where you can push a button and it'll spit out some things. Some of those are based on the metadata, like your JSON lock files and things like that, your package lock files, or some use call trees. Both of those have pluses and minuses. You're probably going to miss a few things here and there. And those are really used on source code. Some of it's used on binaries or container repos. And that's where a lot of people stop. I need an SBOM, push a button, here you go. I think SBOMs are going to move a little past the compliance thing, though, which is what a lot of us are used to in security. It's like compliance drives a lot of the things we do. There's a better place for SBOMs. It's in the runtime. It's when things are actually happening. It's when things are actually being used. And there's lots of tools out there that will help you to generate a runtime SBOM, which, in my opinion, is a more accurate representation of the software and what it's actually doing and what it's actually using. And there's a lot of other caveats to that, right? There's a lot of issues when it comes to SBOMs that I don't think we've figured out yet. Someday maybe, but scanning file systems versus containers, archives. How do SBOM generators handle jars, wars, ears, zips, GZ, whatever you name it, right? Nested archives, fat jars, shading libraries. All of these things are issues with most of your SBOM generators today. Runtime doesn't have that problem because it's in the runtime. It's listening and watching what's going on and what you're using. Other things, how are you identifying these libraries? By name, by hash, dependency tool configs. What if you change something in there, recompile it for your own, name it something different? You might not pick up on it. Test cases, test frameworks, tools, utilities, build, deploy tools. All these things, you can't get any of these running against source code. You can't SBOM frameworks, utilities, build and deploy tools because it's not there. It's static code at this point. Or app server libraries, platform libraries, things that only are used in runtime. You're not bundling them in your source code, right? It's only something used at runtime. And then we can get even more complex, right? all of the different dynamic class loaders, remote class loaders, things like that, again, they don't exist in your source code. So there's no way you'd be able to see it. It's not in your log files. It's not in your, your usage in your call trees and things like that. So there's just a lot of issues with most of the current approaches to how we're generating SBOMs that I don't think accurately reflect the software that you're actually providing to whoever's buying it. And then the other issue, which has forever been a problem, I don't know how we fix it, but most of the libraries that you package in your application aren't even used, right? We don't remove them because someone is scared that it might break something, right? But the reality is only about 9% of an application, of your custom applications, is active library code. That's crazy to think of, right? Forever we talked, 80% of your applications are library code. Well, that's true. They might consist of library code, but you're only really using a teeny tiny percentage of that. And most of the risk actually in your applications, funny enough, it comes from the custom code, which is like only about 20%, right? So, one of the things that I think we'll struggle with forever if we continue to, let's generate the SBOM from the source code or the call trees or metadata or whatever you want to call it, is we're going to find all these CVEs and someone's going to say, hey, you need to fix that. And what do? We bitch, we complain, we moan and say this is going to take way too long. We got to push out all these features. The reality is most of the time you're probably not even using it, right? It's a false positive. You're not using it, but you're running your SBOM in a way that it doesn't know that it's not active, right? You need to know that it's active to be able to be like, hey, and be transparent. Hey, we're not using that. Here's my SBOM that I generated at runtime. This is what I'm using. This is the actual software that's running. Hopefully we can get there. And then other things, that only happen when it's running, in production, APIs, queues, databases, back-end things that it's talking to, which are important aspects of, SBOMs in general, other libraries that you might be pulling in to use these things. So my marketing team created this fun slide just to kind of show you kind of what we've already talked about, right? It's not like you're getting nothing out of creating an SBOM from static source or static binaries. You do get some things, obviously. In my opinion, it's not very accurate, but it is some things. It's kind of like SAST. You get some things. And then you have to go through it and figure out what's real and what's not. So I would highly suggest looking into runtime SBOM generation. If you're a Java developer, we have a free tool for this called JBOM. It can do actually both runtime and static, but I'd recommend doing the runtime if you can. Check it out. I think you'll be surprised. Run it statically and then run it in the runtime and just see what the difference is. And that's all local. It runs on your local machine. So what are the timelines, you might ask, for this whole, I need to provide a self-attestation and I need to provide SBOMs? Any ideas? I would say June 11th is coming up way fast. I haven't heard of any changes to this yet. So June 11th is the date for critical software. Now, if you dig in and you read NIST and OMB's definition of critical software, it's basically all software. So for the most part, most people selling to the federal government are going to have to comply by June 11th of this year. It's interesting. And then everything else by September 14th. But like I said, if you look at the actual definition, most of what we develop and sell, we as in the software world, to the government is and would be defined as critical. However, there has been some pushback, and I mentioned this earlier. So the Information Technology Industry Council, which is the Microsofts, the IBMs, the big players in the software market of the world, have kind of pushed back on this. And this was actually 2 weeks after it was released. Like, hey, we're going to do these things. And I think they have valid points. I feel like it's been ignored, though. I think the government's just like gung-ho, let's push forward with it. But some of the things that I think are missing, right, and they call them out here, I'm not going to walk through all 5, but clarifying the mandate for self-attestation and leveraging a standard form for all agencies makes sense. Like they're trying to, with some of the OE and things like that, they're trying to get all the agencies to do the same things. And then they come out and like, oh, do self-attestations. We don't care what it looks like. Just make sure you do them. I think they have a valid point. Just have them all use the standard form that NIST is supposedly creating, but I haven't seen it yet. They do say SBOMs aren't scalable or consumable yet, which to some extent aren't true, right? We don't have a standard SBOM format yet. There is a working committee that's trying to figure that out, but it's been a complete failure so far on the government side. Is it SPDX? Is it Cyclone DX? Is it something else? And we don't have a way to scale now. I mean, how much software is the government purchasing? It's probably, don't quote me on this, it's probably the largest purchaser of software in the United States between those 102 agencies and whomever else. They want them to adjust some timelines, which they're always going to want that, right? I mean, they're some of the bigger software organizations in the world, and it's going to slow them down in a lot of cases, and things like that. So we'll see. Like I said, I mean, June 11th, what are we, like less than 2 months away from that, which is crazy to think. So I don't know if they're going to make any changes along those lines. All right, so let's talk about, I got some time yet, the SEC disclosure requirements. So this is kind of based off the OE, or the EO, executive order. But the SEC itself is saying, hey, we need to talk more about disclosure. Disclosure of breaches, disclosure of vulnerabilities, being more transparent along those lines so that data can be shared more freely and quickly to others who may need it. So the SEC has proposed, this has not been approved, I don't know why it won't be, but it doesn't require congressional action or anything, which some of the other ones that we'll talk about do. They're going to require material breach disclosures within 4 days of incident, which that doesn't sound like much to me, but I know there's going to be organizations that struggle with 4-day disclosure, just depending on what it is, how broad scale it is, things like that. And then section 2, which hurts my heart a little bit, is like poems for breach disclosures. It's like, let's meet monthly and let's talk about things and what are you doing to prevent it next time and do you have any updates for us? And that's probably going to happen as well. So we'll see what really happens with some of the SEC stuff. But again, like this is not requiring our government or Congress to be like, hey, yes, you can do this. The SEC is just going to push forward with some of these things, which I think will be a good thing in the long run. It'll hurt for a bit, but I think we'll get through it. All right, we'll get through these. It's good. So then, recently, Biden put out another thing called the 2023 National Cybersecurity Strategy. This is where things get confusing to me. So for the last 2 years, we've been talking transparency and accountability. Like that's the direction we're going. We want people to be more transparent. And then they come out with this nice national cybersecurity strategy, which most of it is like, we're going to stop and we're going to defend critical infrastructure. We're going to disrupt and dismantle threat actors, things like that. But the parts talking about software security, we've now shifted. What have we shifted to? Liability. Liability doesn't usually work because now me as a software producer, it's like, okay, now you want me to be both transparent and liable for these things? That doesn't make a lot of sense to me, right? Why would I be transparent for you to see what's under the covers? And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter, I'm still liable for it, right? So I'm interested to see how this is going to work. They still talk about transparency in some of this, but they've really shifted to be hard-nosed, like, software producers are going to be liable for their software they're producing and selling. So I'm going to fly through some of these so we can get some questions in. But number one, which I think is really kind of it's been the overarching theme of the executive order and everything else is really defending the critical infrastructure, something we haven't done a very good job of. They're going to enable much more public and private collaborations, which I think is going to really help, the sharing of information, vulnerabilities that are being detected, and, some of the traffic stuff that, the government and CISA are now getting from some of the major, network-based organizations too. And they're only going to expand on that. Disrupting and dismantling threat actors, this is a big thing, like cyber mercenaries too. That's another thing that the government's trying to, take down some of these, ransomware, which has, been so detrimental to a lot of organizations, including the government, right? They're trying to address that ransomware threat. How they're going to do it, I don't know. Hopefully they have smarter people. But, it is definitely a problem. I don't think not paying is going to solve the problem, right? That just makes the little guy hurt when they're the ones that keep getting attacked. And this is the section that really drives home the shift from transparency to liability. This is like the software security section 3 of the cybersecurity strategy. Promoting privacy and security of personal data, and then shifting that liability from the end user, the purchaser, to the person who's creating. I don't know what that looks like. I mean, we do that today, sort of, right? Let's look at Equifax. They got breached. This is many years ago. At the end of the day, they got fines put on them. The fines were about that big, and they're fine now, right? So obviously that didn't really have much of an impact to them. So we'll see. We'll see if this can work. I was really hoping that they would continue down the transparency path. And then they want to promote investments into new infrastructure and, make sure that, these newer infrastructures are more secure and resilient. And then one of the things that I'm excited about too here, this has nothing to do with software security, but they're gonna try to invest in new things, post quantum crypto, AI, ML, the things that the government kind of shies away from. They want to start investing in that, and at the same time, they want to work on developing a cyber security workforce through apprenticeships, things like that, which I think is something we've needed for quite some time. And then work more closely with foreign relations, international partners, to pursue some of these shared goals. Because the EU is doing some things very similar to like the executive order. Finland, Singapore, they're all kind of starting down this path, doing more privacy and security related things and all of that as well. But there's no timeline. The first time I read through this, I'm like, oh my God, this is going to be I think it's 3 of the 5 will require some form of congressional action. Probably not going to happen. I would hope we could agree it's bipartisan stuff, but we'll see. However, I think they can do some interesting things. I've been talking to one of our security strategy guys at work, and he thinks that they may be able to do some more like SEC type regulations with some of this strategy, so they can kind of get around the congressional need. I guess we'll see. These are multi-year things, right? We all understand that. All right. And then yesterday, anyone read the CISA principles and approaches for security by design and default? I tried to. It's interesting. I like CISA. I like what they're doing. I think Jen Easterly was here last year, or not physically here, but she was one of the keynotes. I think she's done a great job. I feel like secure by design is fairly antiquated. In 2002, Bill Gates wrote about it in, was it the Trustworthy Computing Memo? I think he called it. If we actually did it, it might work, but I think we're beyond that. However, back to transparency. Right now, CISA's like, we're going to embrace this. We're embracing radical transparency and accountability. So the government's not talking again, but that's what I like to see. So that'll be another interesting. Is my time up? Thing to see where that comes down to. So I kind of tried to put in some of this in an overarching slide. There's more, on the green side in the U.S. federal government, but all of this stuff is like within the last 2 years, right? And these are big initiatives. These aren't just little things that you can do overnight. Some of the things that they've got going on. So I like the direction. They're investing a little bit more. I think the 2024 fiscal year budget has like a 13% increase, which when you're talking billions of dollars, that's a lot more billions. So hopefully that actually happens because they're going to need it to get half of these things done. And like I said, the EU is starting to do some things. They have a proposed Cyber Resilience Act, I think it's called, that is very similar to kind of what the executive order is doing. So, in closing, it's time, right? Like, we're here. It's time to attest to your secure development practices. And I think the important part to remember here is, and it took me a while to realize this when I'm filling out the billions of security questionnaires. Like, fill them out accurately. Doesn't mean you're not going to sell to whoever's buying if you're not doing something that maybe you think you should be doing, right? Just attest to what you're doing and then let them make the decision. And then if they say no because of something, reevaluate and maybe add that to your security program. I do think third-party attestations might be best here. The federal government isn't likely to just take you on your word. That's my experience. So I'm sure there's going to be some spawn services for audit-type companies out of this that will work with you to create your attestations. Create SBOMs and create them in the runtime. You want to make these as accurate as you can be, especially if, hey, I'm going to be held liable for this. I want that to be accurate because if something happens and I'm attacked and it's not in my SBOM, I'm pretty much SOL at that point. If it's in my SBOM, I might have an argument like, hey, I'm doing the right things. I exposed that to you. Some of that, is on you as well. And really start taking the responsibility for securing our systems that most of us know we should be doing for years and years. But it's going to hit like a freight train. I mean, June 11th is soon. Like I said, it's government, right? So unless you're selling to the government, you may not feel it, but it's going to bleed out. It's going to get into the private sector for sure. And that's it. Yeah. So I guess part of my issue with the liability side is just them saying liability, right? But if you actually read it, it's a little lighter than that. Like, if you're doing best practices, if you're following what you say you do, you should be okay. Because we all know, there's going to be another CVE tomorrow that you didn't know about, maybe when you provided your SBOM. And like the next log4j hits and you take a hit. I don't know how we can all be held liable for that. I wish they would have used maybe a different term, but if you actually read it, it's a little lighter, but they still use that liability word, which just kind of hit me a little hard. So I think if you're doing it right, if you're providing accurate information and you're being honest about what you're doing and transparent, it'd be hard to be held liable. Now, if you're lying, that's a different story. Yeah. 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 Yeah, of course. And then you let your consumers know, like, it's on you, and they're going to come after you when something happens. And if it's a product you purchased or a framework you're using, we'll see about open source if this affects it. I don't think it will, but we'll see. It's how far down the rabbit hole are you going to go, right? I mean, I'm a software producer. I have partners. We use their software in our software. Like, do we need to keep hopping down that rabbit hole all the way, right? Probably have to get to that point too. Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I don't know how they'd get around it. I mean, especially with the focus on critical infrastructure that the government. I mean, they're really honing in on that, and that's where they want the transparency to get that stuff fixed. And I think a lot of it is just it's bringing out the things we already know, but we don't know until we know. And when you are a little more transparent, now you know how bad something might really be, and get people to keep their stuff up to date, which would be nice. Anything else? Yeah. If you use a good SBOM generator, it doesn't matter, right? If I'm generating an SBOM at runtime, I should see all of that, right? So if you look at software and you look at, say, Java on average uses like 125 libraries in a Java app. Node, on the other hand, uses like 500. But the problem is of those 500, they probably use 5, right? They actually use 5 because you pull in 1, it pulls in 10, they pull in 15, and that just keeps going down the road. But if you're doing your analysis, your SBOM analysis at runtime, you're going to see everything that's used all the way down. And that's the plan and hope. Is it going to be perfect? Of course not. It's software. Software might be using some CDLL that you know nothing about, that you have no way to analyze and know what it is. But I still think your runtime analysis is going to be the most accurate. Sure. Yes, but there are some pretty cool things going on with generative AI when it comes to code coverage. I think it's GitHub X or the Copilot X they're releasing that's going to create these test cases for you for your code, allowing you to exercise the things that you may have forgot to do. When you're using runtime instrumentation and things like that, that's always kind of that question in the back of the head. But I do think that with some of the AI and ML things that are happening, that's going to allow us to even get more accurate and figure out the gaps in code coverage, if that makes sense. It's still a really, in my opinion, very infantile industry, the runtime SBOM thing, right? But it's going to get better, and I think it's going to take advantage of some of the. Yeah. You're the guy that gets the reports from customers and said, "What is this shit?" Right? Why are you running this? Yes, but I think the industry needs to get away from that. It's something, I've been pushing, others have been pushing. Like, just because it exists there does not mean you're vulnerable. If you're using it, yes, you're vulnerable, right? We need a way to prove that we're not using it versus just saying, right, that I'm not using it. It's going to take a while to get to that trust point. But again, transparency and liability, it's on both parties' best interest to do the right thing and to be as transparent as possible. And the person who knows they could be held liable is going to have to do their due diligence and make sure it's as accurate as possible, right? Again, it's not going to be perfect. Now, maybe an approach is to combine all three: runtime, build, in the runtime, whatever. But I think you're just going to run into a lot more heartache and a lot more false positives, if you will, and your developers won't be real happy. Anything up back there? Yeah. It is a security question. She asked why, if you're not using something, why not take it out? I don't know. It's forever plagued the industry, right? You know, back in the day, if you were a mainframe developer, you were at a place for 20 years, 25 years, 30 years doing mainframe development. Now, engineers move around because they like new things, they like new problems. So when someone leaves, maybe the part of the code that they worked on used it at one point. Now someone doesn't know if it's used or not, so they just leave it. So they don't break something. And that's usually the answer. It's not hurting anything, according to them. But the reality is, to your point, if you're not using it, take it out. And hopefully runtime can get to the point where it can have the coverage you need to tell you exactly what you're using, so you can start removing some of the dead code, if you want to call it that. Yeah. Yeah. That's valid. If you've got some dependencies that are pulled in at runtime, you don't really have control over that. Even if you're not using them, right? It's still going to exist and show up in a static scan. Awesome. Well, thanks everyone.